I'm lucky to be here at our archive center where about 150 books, I think, came in for Expozine. We'll be promoting these on the weekend in a sort of a virtual fair fashion. Also, very excitingly, we obviously not hold kinds of meetings and in-person events that we would love to do. But this is the kind of event that obviously is the kind of a replacement for some of these things. We're also really excited, though, as part of what will be talked about tonight is that dusty old project from the 80s, Dial-A-Poem, which our longtime colleague and godfather of sorts of the local spoken word scene, Fortner Anderson, ran in the mid-80s. Mr. Anderson worked with us in the last year and a half or so to dig up and catalog and digitize all the archives of that project. And we're excited to announce that this Friday evening, we're relaunching Dial-A-Poem for the smartphone age. People are still going to have to dial a phone number or add the number to their contacts to call it, and they'll be able to select from this time from a few poems each week. So that's going to be launched on Friday with its own event. We have a comics roundtable discussion tomorrow night. It's bilingual. Also a link on the Expozine page. But that's my introduction for all things Expozine. I suppose that I could let people see me here. Thank you. Louis Rastelli, one of the members of the Expozine team that put together this programming for 2020. I'm going to mute myself and leave the floor to you both after a brief introduction. Well, I actually let you both introduce each other yourselves as well, because I don't want to get too much further into my babble here. I would like to welcome Erin Moure here in Montreal and Michael Nardone here in Montreal. All those people out there in Zoom land, yes, we are all in Montreal this time here for Expozine. Michael, I believe, kind of took the initiative to prepare a discussion of sorts with you, Erin. And so I'll throw the floor to you both here and let you take it from there. We can answer questions and chat and stuff at some point if we see them pop up, but maybe we can wait till maybe 45 minutes, see if questions accumulate and stuff like that. But I will let you get going right now, and welcome and thanks. So look forward to hearing you discuss.
Thanks, Louis.
Thank you, Louis. It's great to be here. Hi, Erin.
Hi, Michael.
It's nice to see you. Shall I introduce you? Do you want to introduce yourself?
I can introduce myself. I mean,
great.
You know, I'm a poet and translator. I've been in Montreal since '84, I guess, and a little bit before Dial-A-Poem started, and that's it. I live here and work here. I think most people are aware of some of my works or my presence, just in terms of poetry, in terms of translating poets from Galician and a little bit from Portuguese and Spanish too, and also some from French, Quebec, some Quebec poets from French, like François Turcot, Chantal Neveu, Nicole Brassard with Robert Maisels. And I translated a book by Louise Dupré as well. So that's me.
That's great. I can't wait to see your new translation of Chantal Neveu's work that I think's just come out, Erin. My name's Michael Nardone. I'm an editor and poet and writer. And yeah, I've been in Montreal for about 10 years now, which is really lovely. I'm a great admirer of Erin Moure's work, and I really think of it as being central to my conception of like Montreal literary activity. And so I'm really happy to be able to talk with her this evening. And I think we were talking about starting off with possibly. Oh, I'll say too before we get going. How much I love Expozine, and just wanted to thank Louis as well for bringing this together. Expozine is always my favorite event of the year. I look forward to it every year. I love entering wherever it is, if it's, you know, in some church basement or some kind of similar space, and seeing everything that everybody's making across languages and across all of Montreal and Quebec and from elsewhere. It's lovely. I can't wait till a time when we can all be doing that again. But so thank you for joining us tonight too. And yeah, Erin and I chatted a little bit earlier, and we listened to some of the recordings that Erin had made in the mid 80s as part of this Dial-A-Poem project, and we were thinking that that she might begin with reading one of those poems.
Yeah, well, I thought I'd open by actually reading the poem live, and then we can maybe at the end we can listen to the poem to the recording and see if I still sound like the same person. I think it would have been in the fall perhaps of '86 that I recorded poems for Fortner Anderson, who lived near me in the plateau at the time, and was creating this. Well, he'd already created this project whereby you could dial, and in those days you did have to dial a phone number, and you could listen to a poem, which was kind of a fun thing to do. And he gathered poets from all generations, all styles, all types of poetry within Montreal, and poets who were passing through town as well. If he saw a poet, he tripped them and made them come up to his place and record a poem. This is one of the poems. It's from a book. Let's see if I can make this actually visible. There we are. Domestic Fuel, that came out in 1985. So here's the poem. Some of the women. Some of the women I know look like the men I imagine. Some of the women I know are wearing blue silk softly this year. Some of the men I know look like crazily and look away. At the side door, the man with light shirt and upturned collar leans forward, holding his hand out from his body. He points it towards the door jamb and turns. He lifts one arm. No one is watching. Before he enters, he touches the future, like silver, like a blade, a small cut in the sky close to his fingers, like computer satellite. Some of the women I know are wearing dresses with prints of sailing boats on blue and pants underneath that. Some of the women I know are dancing. I know they're still dancing. The light flashed on their front and sides makes their bodies jump jaggedly in the air, never touching the dance floor, ever again. I want the men I know to look like women. I want the men I know to stop imitating us and be someone. I want the men I know to stop inventing, as if you can lie about your dreams. So
I love that.
kind of a curiosity from 1985.
I've had those last lines. I want the men I know to look like women. I want the men I know to stop imitating us and be someone. I want the men I know to stop inventing, as if you can lie about your dreams. I've had those lines in my head all afternoon. Can you say something a little bit about that book? We'll go in and talk more about Dial-A-Poem, but I'm just interested in hearing that poem. It sounds like it's. How many years ago is that from? 35, which is crazy to say.
Yeah, it would be 35. It would be 35 years ago that the book came out. So it was before that I wrote the poem. But I wrote this book. Some of the poems are written in Montreal, and probably about 2/3 or 3/4 of them are written in Vancouver, where I lived before moving to Montreal, and where I as well as working on the railway, my friends worked in the feminist community and then with the newspaper Kinesis, and it was kind of it was sort of the 80s heyday of 80s feminism and of the lesbian scene in Vancouver and so on, and so I think a lot of the poems reflect that that set of concerns in a way, although some of them are like curiously like they have a different kind of relevance. People used to make, I thought my poems were pretty straightforward, but people kind of used to make fun of them and tell me that they weren't.
Yeah. I mean, it sounds so contemporary. I can imagine you or a few other writers come to mind of writing something with like so much such a clear sentiment as that. It's really fascinating to hear it. So the poems that you end up reading for Dial-A-Poem, the Montreal version. So maybe I'll set the stage just a little bit and ask you to fill in. Like I know of Dial-A-Poem from the John Giorno project, which is, you know, John Giorno is the amazing, he passed away maybe a year ago. He's the amazing downtown New York I think of him as somebody who's working in the inter-arts. You know, he's a poet, but worked really closely with visual artists, with performance artists. He's a performance artist certainly as well. His partner from a long time is this incredible visual artist, Ugo Rondioni. He's living on the Bowery, and yeah, just somebody who really brought together communities from all sorts. And what I get this sense is I'm just learning about Fortner Anderson through this discussion about the Montreal Dial-A-Poem.
Right.
And so yeah, it sounds like Fortner Anderson is an interesting person and figure, and maybe even in a similar milieu or place in Montreal as Giorno was in New York. Okay, can you say a little bit about him and a little bit about the project?
Well, I don't know. I met Fortner Anderson through Dial-A-Poem. So I wasn't aware of him before then, but he was involved both in the spoken word scene and became more involved in that and in the development of that in Montreal and the crossing over between English and French. And I mean, he's toured shows and productions with Les Filles Électriques, with D. Kim and people like that in Europe. He's definitely a known figure. You know, he would be one of the known Canadian poets in Germany, for example, in Berlin. Because of the work that those people did there. And he was the one person who was working in English in that whole group of people. But he had no fear. I was a shy kid, you know, and he had no fear of like contacting anybody, Irving Layton, come and record a poem on his cassette recorder kind of thing. Wow. He just, he decided he was inspired by the John Giorno project in New York and thought that this could be something we could do in Montreal. And I mean, he had the high tech for it, you know, a cassette recorder, and he was going to hook it up somehow to his telephone, which like boggled my brain.
Yeah, I'm amazed by the actual technological moment, because I mean, strangely now it's very difficult to record on iPhones conversations. You have to have like a specific app for it, but back then you would have had to like devise a very elaborate contraption to actually be recording poets.
Yeah, and I don't know what he used, maybe like an answering machine, because the answering machines were all like analog pieces of machinery that kind of kicked in somehow when your phone rang and you didn't answer it after a set number of rings. So I don't know, was it that? Did he have it recorded as one would have their message recorded? I don't know exactly how technically he did the poem, the Dial-A-Poem, but you could, and something like 200 people a day used to call in, and it lasted for 2 years, the project. So it's kind of great that it's that there's going to be a reboot, Dial-A-Poem 2.0 for the pandemic age.
He even brought John Giorno to Montreal at some point near the start of this, or is
well, I was trying to remember when John Giorno was in Montreal, because he was and I find here that he was at the festival of des Amériques, or whatever it was called. I forget what it was called, the FBA, in 2008. And he was invited as one of the special guests, and did a few kinds of performances there, hosted by Fortner Anderson. Like Sherry D. Wilson was there, Marc Berube, Ivan Coyote, cool. Me, Catherine Kidd, Takalak Partridge, Valerie Kayat. I'm just looking it up here on the Filles Électriques site. They kept track of it. So I just remember what a great energy he had. That was 2008, though. That was already 20 years after.
Yeah. Okay. So it was well after. I wasn't sure if Giorno came up. I know that I spent some time with John Giorno before he passed away, and I asked him a lot about Dial-A-Poem, and I just remember him saying how amazed he was that he was getting calls from all over the world. He was even shut down for a moment by a senator in Kansas because they thought it was like he had queer writers reading.
Oh yeah.
And some young boy from Kansas called, and his mom found out about it and called the senator, and the senator shut it down. But yeah, how did you end up becoming involved with how did it happen that you came into, how did he trip you, as you say,
Well, I mean, I was in town, and I had, well, Domestic Fuel, I think, was my third book. So when my first book came out, I'd come to Montreal to read. So I'd kind of been around a little bit. And he was like, Fortner had a lot of space to fill up. So I went and recorded some of the poems, and some of the audio that was digitalized off of Fortner's old cassettes. There, you could hear Fortner's talking and me talking, like, what should I do? How should I do this? Like, should I just start reading the poem? And Fortner just being like, oh yeah, well, because he's like a totally chill guy. He's full of ideas, but he's not, he's never like bouncing off the walls unless he's actually performing.
wow.
He's very he's a generous man who's thinks of things, is always listening to other people rather than yapping all the time, and has always been full of ideas and full of mirth and joy around poetry. So
that's great.
Mm-hmm.
That's great. I listened to the recordings this afternoon that you recorded, that as they were played when you called, but then I listened to the rough cut, and I loved the like exchange, and there was a moment where you're reading Lunge, actually, from Domestic Fuel, and as soon as you finish, he's just like, maybe you want to try that one again. and you're like, yeah, I messed it up. And yeah, I'm curious, just because I mean, in Montreal, and both of us are involved in these communities. There's a lot of people investigating and thinking about poetry and its relationship to sound and sound recordings.
Yeah.
And that right now it's like it's a major field of study. And I think Montreal is like one of the places where there's like a really diverse, robust community of this happening. And so I'm curious if had you ever recorded your poems before? Was this a new phenomenon?
Oh, I'd recorded poems before, because I'd read at various, like at the community radio station in Montreal, the community radio station in Vancouver, the McGill radio station, and stuff like that. Like, there's poets were always, I mean, we didn't have the internet. It was before the internet. And so like the community radio stations were really the internet of their time. They were, and the university ones, they were where you could hear the music, and where people just from the community were getting up and talking about things, where they'd haul in visitors to come and talk about this and that. And there was no, you just found out more about the kind of treasure of things that were going on in a community, really, and got pointed to other directions, like to theater, to demonstrations, to books, and things like that through those stations.
Yeah. One of the things that happens at the end of, so somebody calls this number for Dial-A-Poem. They hear Erin Moure read a poem, and then at the end of it, Fortner Anderson comes on and either talks about talks about the poem you've just read, the book it's from, but then also every individual recording I listened to had him like referring to some event or demonstration, even a couple theater works, a film night, and each one is done discussing like a bookstore as well. And it's just kind of amazing.
Those were the ads, because some of those things, like the bookstores, would kick in a little bit of money to keep him in cassette tapes, you know.
Awesome.
So he would do the ads at the end, and but to me, there it was linking the poems and the poets with a community that was bigger than any individual. So that you felt. I mean, I worked full time and basically had, you know, a family kind of home life apart from that. So I wasn't you know, hanging out in bars or anything at the time, but this is how you kept track of what was going on. And it like listening to the poems again, and Louis's invitation to come and talk really made me think of like, what, you know, wow, like the era before the internet, you would think there was nothing, but there was a lot.
That's it. I mean, and you know, we're in this time right now where like every single one of our relations is mediated through the internet. Every information, all of our entertainment, and every, like, you know, everything is through the internet. And
Yeah, and we're kind of like learning to take it personally, you know, like I actually feel like we're having a conversation.
yeah, no, I mean, it feels real personal, but just hearing those recordings and hearing you talk about it now, and listening to, like, you know, listening to the end of the recordings when he's talking about these events, it makes me long for this kind of like sort of wild conviviality of being around people, and just like, you know, bumping up with people and hearing what's happening, you know, with no agenda. Can you talk a little bit about like the milieu of Montreal? Like, because I get the sense that there's poets involved, but there's also performance artists, there's performance poets, and you know, I get the sense, and it's very bilingual as well, that the community.
That's always been the case in Montreal, because of especially in terms of performance poetry and spoken word. In Montreal, the spoken word poetry, like elsewhere, and I mean Sherry D. Wilson out in the West can vouch for this, that people would consider it poets, you know, book poets would consider it some kind of inferior approach to poetic craft or whatever, but and not take spoken word as seriously. But so many young people started their interest in literature and poetry with spoken word. And we had people like D. Kim on the Francophone side, and like Ian Ferrier on the Anglo side with Wired on Words, who were creating, like Ian was on the radio and getting people to
Right.
Come and record and come and talk poetry and stuff like that. And then there started to be slams, there started to be events in bars. And I mean, a few times I got, you know, elsewhere in the country, I would have been considered a page poet, and no spoken word person would come anywhere near me, you know. But I was invited to come and judge slams, and invited to come and read at spoken word things. It was a very mixed and vital milieu, and thanks to people like Fortner, like Ian and D. Kim, and all the people who worked around them.
That's great. I think I saw D. Kim not long after I moved to Canada, maybe around 2008, perform at the Banff Center, and yeah, it just blew my mind. And not long after that, I saw Alexis O'Hara, who's in performance communities here in Montreal, but also I remember those performances being.
Yeah, she was younger, so.
Oh, she just I saw her read with Paul Dutton in Christian book.
Right.
And she, like, both of them are stellar performers, and Alexis just blew them out of the water too, because she was just so incredible. So there was really a culture of that in Montreal, I'm guessing, at that time.
And it made us, the rest of us, we couldn't get away. Who weren't considered to be super performative poets or spoken word artists. It made us up the ante. We had to up our game. It was giving a poetry reading. Like, we just couldn't stand there and drone like Margaret Atwood, you know.
Yep.
Nobody would ever invite us back again. So or nobody would talk to you afterwards if you read like that. So we had you know, there was, and those events as well, they formed this real community of endeavor that didn't involve creative writing programs in the university. They weren't, they were really community based, and the people who read and who organized things like that had some kind of jobs out there in the world doing something.
Yeah.
ordinary people do, you know, like, and not teaching at a university.
Yeah. Yeah. In fact, I remember
Very
you
different world.
making a comment about how a lot of you didn't put it this way, but I could almost imagine it being like a lot of the page poets, how they like sort of moved out of Montreal with their CEGEP jobs or things like that, and you know, maybe the ones who, you know, were more into the actual space of like live conviviality of coming together and performing works, maybe stayed a little bit closer into Montreal.
Yeah, well, although I don't blame it. Like, some people had, you know, they got married and had children, and
Yep.
the children looked hungry every day, so they had to feed them.
Exactly.
They had to go get jobs, and the CEGEP jobs were considered, well, this in before that everybody wanted to be a prof of creative writing. The CEGEP jobs, teaching English literature, whatever, you had quite a bit of freedom in creating your curriculum. And inventing courses that you wanted to teach. I mean, Ray Philippe out at John Abbott way on the West Island there, he taught translation and poetry and international poetry and all this border crossing stuff before anybody was interested downtown.
You mentioned
just to finish, you wouldn't have found that in an English department because translation was seen as comp literature or something.
Awesome. You mentioned this person yesterday. Can you say his name again? Ray Philippe?
Ray Philippe.
Great.
Yeah, Raymond Philippe. He published with Arsenal Pulp, I think, a few books up in the 70s, 80s. But I think his last book was published in 94. He was also a musician, and I don't know, a soccer player or something. And he used to organize a bilingual poetry reading series that moved the news, where there would be one Anglo poet and one Francophone poet who were on the bill for the evening. So I can remember reading with France Théoret in a pizza joint, you know, on Milton.
Wow.
And
wow.
Yeah, so it was in the middle of winter. It was there was some of these tentatives to do more of that, and the early 80s as well, taking inspiration from that. Women and Words, Les Femmes et les Mots, we organized various bilingual events with women writers, because even more so back then, sometimes in the French milieu, it can still be problematic, but there was not, nobody paid attention to, you know, inviting women. So we created our own kind of a scene and a way of listening and making works by women available and discussions by women available.
Amazing. Yeah, I mean, this, I don't know the original publishing date of like the Rayon de Marche, but I'm guessing it's around this time?
I think it was about 88 or 89.
Okay, so a little bit after. It's great.
Yeah, a little bit after,
but that's forming. Those discussions are obviously forming and taking place at that time. It's great.
Yeah, and they were writing. Well, when they were all working to write that book, you know, everybody knew it was coming and knew that group existed. And in Room magazine, the Vancouver magazine, they devoted, when they devoted an issue to Women and Words, which was a conference in Vancouver in '83, when they published a lot of work. Somebody had translated, probably Barbara Goddard, by some of the Francophone writers. So that was like a touchstone for me, that book, on first moving to Montreal, the Room magazine issue. In fact, I wore out that issue of Room magazine and had to go look around and buy another one because mine fell apart.
Wow, that's great. Yeah.
And then the internet came, you know.
And you mentioned that you were an early involved in the internet too.
Involved. Well, I just remember, there was a lot. I was remembering BBS's, bulletin board services before, because there was no World Wide Web. And I mean, maybe some of you who are listening or will listen to this know that, but you could kind of have this modem and you could dial up this number and you would end up with your computer and you would end up with this interface with different categories and you had to be a member of the bulletin board to get on it. And you could, contribute things or read things that were under like recipes or like restaurants in Montreal and different. So you met different people just who were talking on these and putting messages up on the bulletin board. And when you were a member, you had to pay some small fee, and then you got like half an hour a day where you could occupy the airwaves and post your messages. You couldn't talk live. And then all of a sudden they invented this email thing, or you could email between members of the same bulletin board. You could send a private message, which was like an email.
Yep.
You had an email address, but you couldn't email anybody who wasn't on your bulletin board. And then they invented a way so you could email somebody who wasn't on your bulletin board.
Great.
And that grew like the early, like AOL and CompuServe, the big providers, their whole structure grew out of that structure of BBS as a bulletin board services.
Yeah. Were you ever involved in these spaces literarily, or you mentioned cooking, but like
I was part of the poetry group there, and just I would find out about readings because people would say, "Oh, there's going to be this happening," or an open mic thing, and a couple of times we were like, "Hey, like we're on the Babylon Montreal bulletin board service." We all live in Montreal. We could actually like get together in a cafe and see each other.
Yeah.
How novel is that?
It's great.
No, so we would, a couple of times we'd get together, but really the bulletin board service was good because it was asynchronous. You could go on and you could respond to somebody and you could answer somebody, but you didn't.
Yeah.
It added another dimension to being able to communicate.
It's like an early listserv / chat room, like proto chat room kind of thing. Yeah, that's great. I really like this thing that you said earlier about how these performance poets really pushed you, that in a lot of spaces you would be considered a page poet. And I think of you as somebody who always thinks with the page, always thinks with the material book in such a clear way. And also, it's not like you're I don't think of you as like a spoken word poet in any kind of way, but at the same time you're always somebody who very much considers the presentation, the space of your making your work live. I think long before I ever met you, and probably before I moved to Montreal, I remember seeing you and Robert Magel read from Nicole Brossard's work, and I watched a video of it on the internet, and just the way that the two of you like worked between languages, the way that you like made space for one another and sort of created this kind of like almost like very subtle choreography on the stage that you're reading. And,
well, Mazel's Robert was also a playwright, so he had a very
great.
He had a very a sense of that space in which you're reading, or with the space in which the voice is happening, and the relation between one voice and another voice and people's bodies in space. As a playwright, he had that kind of a thing. So I learned a lot from him, and he did a lot of wonderful and crazy kind of performances too, Robert.
Great.
Back then.
Who when you're making these recordings, and this is a year or so after your third book, Domestic Fuel, came out. Your first book is Empire York Street. Yeah, and then Wanted Alive, 1983, and Domestic Fuel comes out in 1985. Who were you as a poet at this time?
I don't know. I don't know. I was just, I mean, I was a feminist, lesbian. Involved. To me, there was a kind of a way in which I felt that poetry had something links with social justice, so that was always, I was called a political poet because of that. And this though was an interesting era, because it was the era before I started to really learn other languages. I mean, I came here to Montreal and I had to pick up on French just in order to work, and it interested me anyways. And it interested me, I worked for Via Rail and their headquarters in service design. And so things had to be translated, that I wrote had to be translated into French. And so I learned French there. and just being able to see these spaces between different languages start to emerge kind of changed my writing. It made it possible for me to learn Galician. I eventually left, well, 25 years ago, January 6th next year, I left VRM. And after working there for 20 years. And I ended up learning Galician, translating Chus Pato, who's like a one of Europe's most amazing poets. And I found, I guess, my social justice concerns being more focused on languages and on minority languages and what happens to people. Can they speak? Where can they speak? How can they speak? And then in translating, like, how can I take a Galician poet who writes in the language of what's called a peripheral nationality, that a language that doesn't have the same rights as Spanish in Spain, and writes in a language that might not exist in the future. How can I translate that into English and not just have all that political force vanish in the hegemony of the English language, you know?
Yeah.
So I found that that my own work changed. And it changed as well because no matter how I tried to be really clear, there was always people who would tell me, like, Erin, this doesn't make any sense, or Erin, it's too, like, what are you doing here? Like, how, you know? So I always find, like, gee, I'm trying to be as clear as possible and nobody can understand me. So I might as well write whatever I want.
Yep.
And in Galician even, because it's okay.
You know, there's something interesting because, you know, one of the poems that you read is, I mentioned it earlier, Lunge. For me, there's something about it that has the, like, and that's from Domestic Fuel from 1985.
That's the first poem in the book.
There's something about that poem that has the kind of syntactical gestures and the stops and starts, and like, you know, sometimes you'll stop mid-phrase and that phrase will evolve into something else. You know, there's a emphasis where you put you break up syllables of words, and you're thinking syntactically, and I think of that as a later, you know, I think of that as being more part of your later work. So you know, like, or I mean, it's elemental to a lot of your later work. So it's interesting to see that moment, you know, because you know, you're working in clear phrases, clear language. I'm putting those in air quotes when you're reading some of the women. You know, there's huge jumps between line to line, idea to idea. It's fantastic. But then there's that syntactic break. So, you know, you mentioned that some of the women was probably written in Vancouver. Would Lunge be like a Montreal poem, or does?
Yeah, I think actually some of the women would be written in Vancouver. I think Lunge was written in Vancouver too, because
Great.
I just reading the poem here because I'm sure it doesn't see. Yeah, that's it. Yeah, and it's written about an allergic reaction too, which is another of the things that I have to live with. And one of the things I was going to say, like earlier when you were saying how you miss all the foo-for-ah of being around people in person and stuff. For me, I'm actually like I might be one of the like happy people in this shutdown thing, because I like being around people, but they're kind of, if I get near anybody who's had peanuts, I could die, you know?
Yeah.
So I kind of appreciate interacting at a distance. It's kind of makes a lot of things where there's crowds, I get sick easily anyways, like never mind. Now that everybody's socially distancing and staying home, I haven't been sick in a year. You know, I'm the healthiest ever. I've gained 2 months in my life this year from not being sick. So there's some things about the way the normalcy that everybody longs for, that for some people, for different reasons of allergies, for reasons of physical accessibility and things like that, that it's not as it's not as great as it's cooked up to be for people who have other issues, you know. So I have to
Totally.
say I kind of enjoy this talk, you know.
Yeah. Yeah, totally. Yeah.
I'd throw that in.
Yeah, no, I mean, I feel strangely at ease just being home with my daughter and my dog and my
Mhm.
books as well. But I do really miss being in spaces of yeah, just like
Shared endeavor. No, it's cool.
that's it. That's really it.
I
Yeah.
do miss it, but it's going to come back, and so I'm trying to enjoy this one.
Yeah,
I
totally.
like to just you know, never get sick. It's nice.
Yeah. Yeah.
Anyway,
I don't,
sorry, that was a distraction.
no. I was just kind of thinking about, you know, where one thing that you mentioned earlier is that just prior to coming to Montreal. So I'm interested in thinking of like, you know, you're a fascinating poet in the sense that you're working between all of these languages. You're working in through all of these international networks of poetry across languages. You're working across communities and, you know, social justice, feminism, of course. You mentioned yesterday that just prior to moving to Montreal that you're part of something. I wrote a note. It's like the
Oh,
Vancouver Industrial
Writers
Writers.
Union, VWU.
Yeah, VWU. Yeah, Vancouver Industrial Writers Union. What
Yeah,
was that?
there's actually an anthology that was put together of those writers. Well, it was I don't maybe I don't know in the late 70s or very early 80s in Vancouver. I was seeking a community, and there was Tom Wayman at one point got people together to talk about poems and stuff. Then he kind of vanished. I don't know where he went, Nelson or something. But and the rest of us kept meeting in one way or another, and that was some things about it were really frustrating to me because it was really like heterosexual. It wasn't that. It was kind of like had some radical people and some people who weren't that radical. But on the other hand, it was people who were trying to write to poetry that included work or included images from the everyday, which was something that interested me to explore. Although I was always because I was also interested in philosophy and interested in abstract things and language. Those were maybe some of the people who were complaining that I wasn't always clear. However, like that's where I met Phil Hall and
Right.
Jeff Dirksen, Calvin Wharton, people, Zoe Landale. We had it was a very warm group of people that met, and we just read our poems to each other once a month or something like that. And I with Phil Hall, I organized on behalf of VWU. We organized a reading series that we called Work to Write. And we found out that nobodies could like write Pat Lane a letter and invite him to a poetry reading, and he would say yes, you know. And then we could write to the Cantor Council, and they gave us some money, and we were like, how come nobody told us this?
That's great.
So those were exciting moments in my life when, you know,
Yeah.
just because you realized you could do things and meet people and listen to them, and yeah, fun.
And I think you said at the start when you were sort of introducing the poem, I think you said you moved to Montreal like 1984, 1985.
85 permanently. 84, I was on temporary jobs at BRE. I was loaned quarters.
Great. That's great. So it's interesting. These recordings are really capturing you like upon not like just like mixing into the Montreal world. These because they're probably from like 85, 86, 87, somewhere around there.
I think they're Dial-A-Poem is from 85 to 87, and I probably got involved in 86. Maybe before that, but I moved in 86 to Jeanne-Mance, just north of Mount Royal.
Great.
From up on Park near something or other, north of Bernard anyway.
Yeah.
So I'm sure I remember walking over to Fortner Anderson's from Jeanne Mance, or maybe I took a bus and walked over there.
And where was this place?
I think he was on Clark.
Cool.
Clark, just north of Rochelle or something. Yeah.
Great.
He was just in the neighborhood, up some stairs in a triplex. And so that was, yeah. And yeah, I went there and recorded the poems. I can't believe he kept the cassettes all those years.
It's amazing. It's totally amazing. I hope that I hope through the discussion of these, I actually want to know the history of these cassettes. It's something that I love. I love the fact of Jason Camlott, finding this box of reel-to-reels, and that is what the basis of spoken web, that these reel-to-reels that were shoved into, the top of somewhere on the top of a bookshelf and everything.
Well, that's because in those days, because at Concordia, at Sir George, they recorded the poetry readings, but people would, they were just so gaga over having these tape recorders, these reel-to-reels. They would record stuff with no idea what they were ever going to use it for again,
Yeah.
Same with the co-op radio stations and stuff like that. There was a lot of material that was saved. The CBC as well. I can remember when the CBC moved from Calgary, moved from this little place they had in Calgary to another place, and it was just like a dumpster full of stuff.
Yeah, I love these material histories because these recordings are so overlooked. I talked with Charles Bernstein, and the pen sound is like one of the most incredible audio archives of contemporary poetry, and Charles's personal collection forms the basis of that collection.
Right.
And I asked Charles what the history of the material collections, and he just said that he had maybe 300 or 400 cassettes, in plastic bags stuffed in a closet, in his apartment, because he didn't have space to do anything with them. So yeah,
no, that's amazing. And what Spoken Web is doing is amazing, and their links and nodes all over North America. It's really vital work, looking in different ways at how the sound recordings and the performances matter as what is the poetry event, is that it's not the poem, but on the other hand, it's not just advertising for the poem, it's something in itself. That's it.
Yeah. On that note, maybe we talked about the possibility of playing the recording.
Sure, I'll play the recording here, and hopefully you can pick it up of some of the women that was made in.
Great. I want to ask you one or two questions, and if anybody that's following online right now has any questions, feel free to put them into chat.
Yeah, please do. Okay, I'm going to hit this and see if it'll play.
Great.
And I'm Erin Moure. Some of the women. Some of the women I know look like the men I imagined. Some of the women I know are wearing blue silk softly this year. Some of the men I know look like crazily and look away. At the side door, the man with light shirt and upturned collar leans forward, holding his hand out from his body. He points it toward the door jamb and turns. He lifts one arm. No one is watching. Before he enters, he touches the future, like silver, like a blade, a small cut in the sky close to his fingers, like computer satellites. Some of the women I know are wearing dresses with prints of sailing boats on blue and pants underneath that. Some of the women I know are dancing. I know they are still dancing. The light flashed on their front and sides makes their bodies jump jaggedly in the air, never touching the dance floor ever again. I want the men I know to look like women. I want the men I know to stop imitating us and be someone. I want the men I know to stop inventing, as if you can lie about your dreams.
That was Erin Moure reading Some of the Women. Today's poem has been sponsored by the Double Hook Bookstore at 1234A, Green Avenue in Westmount. You may phone them at 932-5093. We thank them for their support. And tomorrow we play the work of Ruth Taylor, her poem, The Yellow Rose Tree.
That's great.
Yeah, it's wonderful. I love hearing Fortner and his.
He's so cool. He's got such a cool voice.
Oh, he's like totally yeah.
He's
laid
very,
back.
yeah, I was gonna say very chill. What's it like hearing your voice?
I don't know. It actually sounds like me. When I was younger, I used to hate hearing my voice recorded. And now I hate seeing myself. Like if I had to look at this later, I would be like, oh my God. But yeah, no, it sounds like, does it sound like me to you?
Yeah, no, I mean it's funny when I listened to it this afternoon, I was just like, it's so you. Like yeah,
No.
yeah, I mean yeah, it's just yeah, it's fantastic to hear. It's fantastic to hear that little bit of sort of paraphonotextual sound at the end too. You could hear like a car passing by or a car horn or something like
Yeah, that was great.
That's great. I don't have any more questions or anything. If people, I see. Oh,
one question here. Claire is asking,
yeah,
what
great.
happens after the beep? Could the listener leave a message in response? No, it was over after that, Clara. But I wonder if there's a way. I don't know how, because they're relaunching it. The Dial-A-Poem 2.0, I call it, is where you can choose. You choose a poem. There'll be several poems that you can choose from, and you can choose in English or in French. That will be launched starting on Friday. Oh, Sebastian says there will be a voicemail. So maybe there'll be some kind of interaction. You'll have to phone them up, Clara.
I mean, it's amazing because I think Dial-Poem precedes the John Giorno version precedes, you know, so there's this moment, it precedes the Giorno poetry system records. So there's this interesting thing where John Giorno is like hosting a lot of performances in New York that he starts recording poets and putting them on the phone. And then eventually all those recordings end up turning into those incredible LP systems. I wonder, I'm guessing that these things mostly stayed as cassettes and personal cassettes that he had. I guess they had no other circulation beyond the phone. Do you have any?
No, I don't think so. I didn't hear anything about it after that until hearing last year that there was this from Fortner, that there was this possibility that they were going to be digitalized and preserved, and that he still had them. And I was just kind of like, you still have them? That's it was kind of so amazing. But it makes me think of other things too. Like I didn't buy a TV until 1996 when I left Via Rail. Because I never had a TV. A friend of mine came over and said, Erin, my sister works as the accountant for this electronics chain that doesn't exist anymore. And I'm allowed to get her employee discount. So let's go get you a TV. So off I went, I got this TV and a VCR. And so then in one of my, right after that, of course, I got sick, because that's one of my favorite things to do in the middle of winter is get sick for a month.
Yeah.
And Norma Cole sent me a whole bunch of VHS tapes from the San Francisco, the Poetry Center there.
Oh, amazing.
And so because I was going bats, I was just sick for so long. And so at the bottom of my bed, I set up this TV and the VCR. And the first thing I ever watched on my TV was a poetry reading by Barbara Guest.
Wow. Oh my gosh.
I was so happy. I was lying there and I was just so happy.
One of the most incredible poets.
Yeah.
That Norma Cole is somebody who absolutely needs to be in Montreal. Has she ever visited? Has she
lived here for a year?
Oh, is that right? Wow. I think of her as an incredible translator, incredible poet, obviously, as well. Yeah, I would be amazing to have her come here. I see somebody else popped up. Oh, hi, Sarah Burgoyne. Can you tell us about the process of choosing some women for Dial-A-Poem, Erin? It's beautiful.
Oh, thanks, Sarah. I can't tell you anything about the process of choosing it. I think because I was asked to read a poem for 2 minutes that I just picked that one. And I mean, the other ones, what other ones? I don't know if they're all in that book or not.
One's called Neighbors and the other one's called Horse Chestnuts.
Yeah, there's a rough. Yeah, Neighbors, Some of the Women, Lunge, and Horse Chestnuts. Yeah, I just picked 4 poems. I think the Lunge is in this book. I bet the other ones are too. Neighbors is in this book. I thought Neighbors wasn't ever published. Horse Chestnuts must be here as well. Horse Chestnuts, yeah. Yeah, so I just picked 4 poems out of that book, I guess.
That's great.
Now Louis also says in the chat that Fortner moved on to his C-Cut radio show in 1987, which they offered him because of Dial-A-Poem. He's played Poetry Weekly on CKUT nonstop since then.
Oh, cool.
What a guy, eh?
It's cool. I'm actually really inspired. I went to Fortner Anderson's website while we were talking last night, and yeah, it just seems like he's doing really, really fantastic work still. Yeah, it's great. It's it's this funny thing where you think that you get the lay of the land in terms of like who's making stuff and doing things around you, and then there's just this whole other field of activity that opens up. I mean, no.
Yeah, well, it's partly because like Fortner does stuff live and he does stuff with voice, and those are his concerns. He's not running around broadcasting Fortner Anderson. He's just doing his thing, and he didn't teach at the university, and he didn't start a blog, and he didn't start he has a website like everybody has now just to keep track of yourself. Yeah, so there's that whole community radio culture where you'd go and climb up some rickety stairs on Saint Laurent and
totally
up in this studio. It'd be all. Yeah.
I'm really impressed by these figures that really place themselves as working in between languages, like it seems like Fortner Anderson does as well too. It's just this interesting thing that he would be somebody who's maybe recognized in places like Germany, but it's just fascinating to study these people and the lives that they live in, making a point to interact in. I mean, it's a misstatement to say the two communities, because there's obviously like infinite communities in there involved beyond the 2 main languages of this place. But yeah, I'm just fascinated by people that really try to forge a path between them.
Yeah, well, and Fortner Anderson's definitely shining example of that.
Yeah,
for sure. Great. So I don't know. Does anybody else have a question, or we've kind of hit the end of our thing. Here's Louis.
Hey.
Yeah, we're at exactly 1 hour too. Look at us. Whew.
That was amazing. And yeah, you're right. I should mention why Expozine would get involved in getting back into Dial-A-Poem. When we do readings, it's about recent books. And as you saw, the original Dial-A-Poem, he plugged the Double Hook bookstore, and you mentioned you were reading from a recent book at the time.
Right.
We kind of want to do that again, because when we organize readings, they tend to be group readings with multiple recent books. They don't have to be launches. They aren't the kind of readings that are put on by one publisher with 4 of their authors rushing through excerpts. So the Dial-A-Poem model, we're like, this would really work, especially now that we have the pandemic, and it's not going to be so obvious to promote recent books. So we hope that people follow the same model. And actually, I'm happy to announce that most likely the first Anglophone poet, because this time we'll be able to mix Anglophone and Francophone poets and be able to press 1 for one or 2 for the other. But Fortner Anderson himself has a brand new book coming out, and he is going to read some excerpts for the very first week of Dial-A-Poem 2020, launching on Friday.
Excellent.
And he actually mentioned that he's a upstanding fellow in every way. I asked him how it happened that he did not read for the original version, And he was aghast. He's like, if I was, if it looked like I was setting up a platform just to promote myself, that would be terrible. I made a point of never promoting my own work just so that nobody would get that idea.
Yeah. No, he's never been somebody who was going off just to promote himself. He was always working in groups, working because something was interesting. There was something happening. He was contributing to something. He was making a space for other people, and then he would be there doing his work. But he's always a guy who makes space for other people.
Well, we're really happy to be able to make a bit of space for him in this resuscitated project. I'm really, really happy that we're able to go over some of the what it was like in those days. I love traveling back, like Michael was saying, to the different era. I really have to thank you for that, and thank you, Mike, for having such a great discussion. Time did fly fast. I don't know if I guess there's not any last questions I'm seeing there. Or if either of you have any last words that you want to mention.
I'll just thank you, Louis, for organizing this, and Michael for being game for it as well. And it was I've enjoyed definitely enjoyed talking to you, and enjoyed the feedback from the people who have been listening in or watching. Thank you very much.
Merci.
Yeah, thank you, everyone. Thank you, Louis. Thank you for being a force behind expozine. Like I said when we started off, I'm so thankful for this space. I'm so thankful to live in a space where small press activity and micro press activity is given a platform and is allowed to be the robust culture that it is, and for that, like I genuinely, like, I know last year at expozine I sat down with David Bradford from House Press, and just we shared a table together, and yeah, I love all the people and all the books people are making, and print objects too. I'm just so thankful for it.
Thank you again. We are going to try to replicate a little bit of that on Saturday and Sunday with a interactive virtual fair on the website. A lot of this programming will actually live on our YouTube channel on a special expozine 2020 playlist after this weekend. But of course, tomorrow night at 7 o'clock, we have another panel, a bilingual panel on graphic novels and publishing in both English and French with some of our publishers at expozine, Conundrum and Pow Pow. We're two of the rare publishers in Canada who publish in either both languages or do translations of the other official language. And then Friday night at 8 p.m., we will have a number of readers reading, including some that are part of the first slate of new Dial-A-Poem poets. All of that is to be found out on the homepage at expozine.ca, or on the homepage in the Facebook group or the Facebook event and all that usual stuff. So keep an eye out for that. And thanks so much for helping us kick off a modest amount of expozine virtual program.